In this video, we're going to show you how quickly you can create a crosstab using MarketSight's Crosstab Designer. For additional customization options like nesting, netting, and weighting, please see our training video on advanced crosstabs. Whether you're modifying an existing crosstab or creating one from scratch, the process is essentially the same, so we'll begin by clicking the New button on the Crosstab page. Once I select my columns and rows in the Crosstab Designer area on the left, the crosstab is automatically generated in the preview window on the right. The Designer is organized into tabs that cover all of the properties of a crosstab. In this video, we'll look at the Design tab. This is where we decide which variables to include in our crosstab, as well as which calculations to display. You'll see that there are two windows in the Designer. On the left, we have a list of all of the variables in this dataset. By default, variables in MarketSight are sorted in the order the questions appear in the original survey or the dataset. You can quickly select and categorize variables into groups that apply to the dataset you're working with. When I expand a category, I can see the variables that belong to it. As I view these variables, I can see the variable name is being displayed in the list. I can also view the variable codes, or both the codes and the names at the same time, by selecting the appropriate choice in this drop-down. I can change how I sort the variables in this list, and I can sort the list in alphabetical order by choosing this option. This is particularly useful if you have a large number of variables in your dataset. Finally, I can search for variables if I don't happen to know which category they're in or their exact names. For example, I'd like to find all the variables with the word recommend in the name. When I use the search function, MarketSight will display all of the variables from any category that contains my search term. I can clear these search results and return to viewing all variables by clicking on the X. On the right side of the Crosstab Designer, we have a tabbed window for the variables we want in our crosstab. The basic idea is to select one or more variables on the left, then drag them to the appropriate location on the right. Let's choose our column variables. I can select one variable at a time, or I can select multiple variables simultaneously. For this crosstab, let's include age and gender as our column variables. Once the variables are in the right-hand window, I can reorder them by dragging and dropping, or by using these arrows. Now, let's take a look at the different values for these two variables to see if there are any that we'd like to exclude from this crosstab. I can expand each variable individually, or click here to expand all of them at once. For this crosstab, I'd like to remove any responses that don't add value to my analysis, so I'll uncheck Decline to Answer in the age variable. Now, let's look at our column headers and make a labeling change. I'll click on the Options link here, and I'll shorten one of our values for age, so it takes up less space. We'll change the 65 and over label to 65 plus. That's it for setting up our columns. Now, let's move on to the rows. To select our rows, let's expand the general usage category on the variables list. We'll add monthly cell phone bill and purpose of usage by moving them to the Rows tab. If I need to make any changes to my row variables, I can simply right-click on the variable name and choose Edit Variable. Once the edit is complete, any adjustments I make will appear in the Crosstab preview on the right. As we look at the Crosstab, we can see calculations are automatically displayed for each row variable. We can modify which calculations are shown by clicking on the Options link and choosing Calculations. For example, I could choose to show the median, the max, and the min for the phone bill for a quick overview of the data in this variable. Or I could also show the row percent for the purpose of usage question. That's really all it takes to set up your rows. In fact, if you set your defaults in the Options section, then you don't need to change these settings in your crosstabs. Let's move on to the Filters tab, where we'll set up a filter to limit the data, in this case the number of survey responses, that are included in this crosstab. I have two options for filters. I can use the saved filter that was created earlier in the Variables section of MarketSight. These saved filters are in their own category in the variables list and can be reused on any crosstab. Or I can create filters on the fly just for this crosstab by choosing one or more variables from the dataset and selecting certain values. To do this, I drag and drop variables into the Filters tab. By default, every value will be selected and the data included in the crosstab. If I don't want to include some data, I simply deselect that value. Different variable types will have different filter styles by default. For example, this numeric open-end will give me a slider that I can use to filter respondents in or out. That wraps up the Filters section. Keep in mind that when you create your own crosstabs, you'll be working much faster and typically choosing only your columns and rows. We've gone into a fair amount of detail about additional features in this video that you won't always need to do each time. So let's save this crosstab and close the editor to take a closer look at it. Age and gender are the column variables, arranged side by side, while monthly cell phone bill and purpose of usage are the rows. Our filters are available along the side and can be used at any time. You can also see by the pink and blue highlighting in this crosstab that MarketSight automatically ran the appropriate test of statistical significance. Holding my mouse over these color-coded cells provides more information about stat test results. The note at the top of the crosstab tells us that the confidence level I've run the stat test at is 95%. I can change the confidence level on the Statistics tab at any time. We'll talk about how to further configure those tests in another training video on advanced crosstabs. There are two additional crosstabbing features in MarketSight that I'd like to point out before we wrap things up. The first is the ability to export. You may want to save this crosstab as an Excel, PDF, or PowerPoint document. To do that, just click on Export and select the output format that you'd like. MarketSight will export this crosstab, and you can download the file in a few seconds from the tasks list here. Finally, if you'd like to create a chart or graph of this crosstab, click on a charting icon to create a chart of the corresponding area of the crosstab. Just select the chart type from the menu, and MarketSight will create the chart. You can also use MarketSight's batch charting feature to create multiple charts, one for each row variable, all at once. That concludes our training video on the basics of creating a crosstab. We'll cover advanced information like weighting, netting, statistics, and more in separate videos.